Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, Katie Godden, and the team at The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. This week, we'll be touching on some links between learning and project management in organisational change. I'm delighted to welcome Chris King to the podcast. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what you're currently up to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Katie. Hi, I'm Chris. I have been working from home for the past 4 years, and I've been a project manager for 8 years. I'm currently in the civil service, so just to note, all my views expressed are indeed my own, and I won't be talking about government stuff anyway, so it's totally fine. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I've worked on some really big projects in the UK, such as the EU exit work that happened a couple of years ago. I've worked on COVID response at an organisational level, and I've done some stuff around like creating project management offices and portfolio management offices. But it's fair to say it's not always been so rosy and so high flying. Back in 2009, that was when I was at uni, and that was when I failed uni, actually. It was one of those times where I thought, like, I'd totally ruined my life. This is like what you think as a 20-year-old. You're like, oh my God, that's it. That's the end. We failed uni and no degree. Everyone else is going to have degrees. This is like awful. This is the worst possible thing that could possibly have happened. Obviously, I'm sat here now, so it wasn't. And I guess part of one of the reasons sort of I wanted to do this podcast and some of the things that are going on, I want to really sort of help people who are perhaps find themselves in that setback position, just to sort of, really like let them know, there are ways to progress. And this was fairly recently, so, 2009 wasn't too long ago. I'm not that old just yet. So yeah, I did some sort of odd jobs at hospitals, and eventually got a couple of basic admin jobs, sort of minimum wage type things, until I got onto a temporary contract as a project support officer. And that was what really sort of got me going into the project management space. Slightly funny story around me going to that project support role. I had to ask for permission from my then line manager to sort of apply for it, because it was an internal loan. And I remember very vividly, like, being stood next to this person, who obviously I won't name, and them saying, "Oh, Chris, I think that might be a bit complex for you. Oh, I'm not sure you should go for that kind of role." Which so I thought, okay, well, maybe let me be the judge of that, and it's only temporary, so if it is, I can always come back. And anyway, ever since then, I've been off and away in project management space. I impressed the people I worked with there, and sort of got into the permanent role, and then I was supported in getting qualifications, and have sort of climbed that project management ladder through PSO work to project management to program management, and as I mentioned earlier, creating a PMO. I've often been brought into work in those like crisis type situations. So like EU exit and COVID, both like big, massive, in their own ways, crises that needed like a lot of urgent stuff doing very urgently and very sort of high level. So yeah, that's sort of what I've ended up doing. I'm sort of the fix it man. Maybe I should have called myself Fix It Chris. Anyway, so recently I've been thinking about how I can sort of give back to others through sort of my project management expertise, and as well as sort of my experience of working from home, because obviously a lot of people have been forcibly working from home for the past 18 months or more. And as someone who's done it for a couple of years now, I feel like I've got a lot I could sort of help people with and offer to them in terms of, what might this look like in the future? Because there's a lot of people now who are going to have to keep working from home, even after, restrictions lift. So I think there's just going to be a whole load of people in future who are, the number of people working from home is only ever going to go up. And at the moment, I don't think we really have the support mechanisms, and people don't really understand, organizations don't really understand how best to support people in doing that. Aside from, you get to stay in bed a bit longer in the mornings. So surely it's perfect. It's easy, right? It's not.
No, that's awesome. I think it's a good time as well, kind of coincides with people getting their exam results or previously getting their exam results recently, and then potentially worrying about that. Perhaps they haven't got the exam results they were hoping for, etc. But you're kind of proof on that you don't necessarily need to do that, and you can still be successful in an area that whatever area that you do want to go into. So that's really interesting. And yeah, like we'll talk more later about kind of working from home and how you can help support people on that as well.
Just on that education point, I do want to say, massively respect degrees and education. If you can get it and it's something you want to do, then that is definitely the best route to go down. That's definitely what people would want to do if it's right for them and what they want to do. I guess from my perspective, it's more if you sort of hit that brick wall and struggle and for whatever reason have to stop and take a different route. I guess what I'm saying is there are other routes. It's not the end.
Yes, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not the end of the world. Cool. So your area of expertise is project management. Can you explain what that means in a bit more detail? Because obviously it's kind of something that's thrown about quite a lot, and some people understand it, some people don't, and why it's important to get project management right.
There's a couple of, I think, big misconceptions around projects, especially in sort of organizational business world. One is that organizations seem to think, oh, if somebody is good at a skill, a thing that they do, whether you're a data analyst or an academy training person, or if you're sort of a HR expert or whatever your field of expertise is, organizations often seem to think, well, if you're good at that, well, you can run projects in that field. And I'm not saying that isn't true, but that unfairly does is it puts people in a position where they have to sink or swim, learn a lot of skills and practices that aren't necessarily what they want to do, what they know how to do, and they often aren't very well supported in doing that. So that's certainly something that people struggle with. And the other misconception is that projects sort of go on forever. Because the most important thing, the most basic thing about a project is it starts, we deliver something, a change happens, a thing is created, a website or a doodad or whatever, and then it finishes and it ends and the resources can go off and do other stuff. One of the reasons that it's so important to sort of have that good project management like framework and understanding where you want projects to happen is you're assessing and making sure that the change you're making is the right change. It's right for the business. It's the right time to do it. It's the right opportunity to do it. Then you've got making that change happen in as efficient and effective a way as possible. That's where all sort of the fairly stringent sort of methodologies come in and the different ways of doing that. And then finally, you're making sure that all these changes to a business will inevitably cost money or time or resource. So what that project management expertise does is it means that from an organizational perspective, an organization is spending hopefully the least amount of resource and money to get the most amount of benefit out of that change, because that change will have benefit in one way or the other, whether it's the bottom line or to bring more customers in or for well-being of people, whatever.
I think I've worked in organizations before as well, and what you're saying there is like having a start and an end date is people aren't quite sure when that actually turns off and turns into business as usual. So is that one of the big issues that you've seen?
Yeah, well, so just you're right, the start and the end definitely are classically done poorly, and it's something like 50% of projects that don't go through a proper initiation phase fail. And often when me as a project manager, when I get brought in, they're already into sort of the delivery phase. They're into that middle bit of, oh, we should have all the things in place and we should be doing the change or creating the things, and for some reason it's not working and it's not doing what we want it to do. So yeah, that's certainly one area where there's a big challenge, where you need to get resource and expertise in early to really ask that question of, okay, what is the change? Why is it the right change? how can we assess it? Because if you get all that set up at the start, you understand the answers to all those questions. Then when you come to the end, you can say, oh, well, we know we've reached the end now. We know that this thing has been delivered. We have identified what are the good things that are going to happen, the benefits, and we have set things up to measure those things so that when those measurements get hit, those targets get hit, well, we know the project's finished, and we can start to then do things like evaluation and lessons learned, and sort of look back and properly understand, okay, what has the change delivered, and say, hopefully, well done everyone, you can go off and work on other projects now.
I think there's a real link there to learning as well, because it's like, but what you're trying to say essentially is that you've got to understand kind of your output and purpose of what you're doing, right? And that's one of the big bits in learning that I think people tend to miss. And they don't start with kind of like that key objective. What are you actually trying to achieve by creating a piece of learning, for example, or implementing a piece of learning technology? What are you trying to solve? What business issue is there? And some people are just doing it because other companies that are similar to theirs are doing it, or they've seen it on LinkedIn or something like that, and they think that that's the right way of doing it, but they haven't got that real purpose there. So I think people tend to kind of get lost and struggle with that, and then it kind of fails, similar to how a project can potentially go a little bit wrong because you haven't got that real understanding.
Exactly. In fact, I've got a story that sort of speaks to that. Exactly. So in a previous organization I was working at, we were trying to make a big change, and we wanted to understand, we wanted to have the right tools to be able to sort of measure all of those changes. So myself and another colleague were sent to do training on a piece of software that we were going to procure, that we could then use to sort of measure all of our like project change stuff, and it would sort of carry on into the future. So it was the right training, learning, intervention. It was like the right people going, and it was at the right time to do it, because we needed to have this knowledge before we started the majority of the work. So you're thinking, tick, 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 this should be perfect, this should be an easy win. But the problem was, we went off and did this classroom learning over a couple of days, learned a heck of a lot in that sort of theoretical environment. And then when we came back to the business, well, we hadn't actually procured the software in time, and there was delays to that, and then other things happened, and you go off and work on other stuff, and by the time we came back round to saying, okay, this thing now exists, we can start using it, that sort of really good learning that we had taken on board had gone, because we'd lost that practice. We hadn't been practicing it on a regular basis, and if you're not doing that, then you're really going to struggle to sort of maintain that knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of comes back to kind of making sure the content that you're getting or the type of learning that you're going on is right as well. And obviously in that example, having licenses for whatever software it is at the right time as well is going to help that, because like you said, you can go to a classroom, it can be great learning and you remember it for a few days, but if you're not doing that continuously, that's when things start to go wrong, and or your knowledge of that just goes, doesn't it? Because especially if it's software and it's a bit complicated, or you have to do things in certain orders, etc., to really get the use out of that's what you need to be doing that on a daily basis, so you actually get the proper understanding of it. From your explanation, what skills do you have in your role which can be transferred into a learning role, do you think?
So yeah, I think there's a couple of really key ones that maybe transfer across many different fields, as well as project management and learning. I'd say probably the first and biggest one is sort of people skills and stakeholder management, trying to sort of understand like the different characters that you're working with and how best to present information to them so they will understand it in the best possible way. Yeah. Obviously from a project perspective, that is, because I want them to say yes to something. I want to give them the information so that they can make a decision that says, yes, Chris, carry on, or go get that thing. And I can go, that's it, well done, that's a brilliant decision, I totally support that, I'm going to go off and do the thing I want to do. And I can see that from like a learning environment. If you're like a teacher in a classroom, you probably have to assess the people that you're training. And if you've got like a classroom of people, whether it's a team or a school class, then you can have different characters who understand things in different ways, and it perhaps the message needs to be catered and changed to cater to their specific needs and understanding. And then so that sort of feeds into like telling stories as well, which is around, okay, you need to give them the information to learn or to make a decision or to make progress in the way that you're trying to get them to make progress. But you need to tell it to them in like an evocative way that's sort of interesting, captures their attention, makes them invested in either that learning journey or, from my perspective, that training journey. Maybe the word journey is a really good one, because you're going from a project, you're going from a state of whatever your team is or your organization is, you're going through a change, and then you're coming out the other side with hopefully more than you had before. You're better armed to face the world. And perhaps learning is the exact same. You have a person or people who have whatever skills and experience they have. They go through that change, that learning journey, and they come out better armed to face whatever it is that they're being armed to face.
Yeah, I think you touched on a point there, which was actually really rings true with learning. Is kind of that stakeholder engagement and taking people on that journey, because I think you can often fall into being too detailed about a particular learning project, and you're going way too much detail. Whereas if you kind of keep it high level for your key stakeholders that are going to be your decision makers, etc., you need to sell them that journey, don't you? You need to make sure that they understand the purpose of what you're doing, it's the right way of doing it, etc. But if you don't do that well, people are just going to say no. But like you said, you want people to say yes. But then equally, when you're working in your teams, you need to make sure that they understand the level of detail so they can then go away and actually do that bits of work. So it's making sure you understand your audiences and you kind of pitch to the audiences at the right time. So I know you've worked on some big challenges throughout the last year or so, or longer than that. What do you think your biggest challenge has been to date?
I think that the biggest, so what I've written down here, because obviously I did do my homework and prep ahead of this podcast. And I had a good long think about this, because, I have worked on sort of COVID intervention and EU exit stuff, but I think the true answer is mental health, both my own and also sort of the people that I work with across various organizations over the past couple of years, especially, like, say, the past 12, 18 months, because as someone who chose to work from home, I saw it as this sort of great opportunity, and it very much felt like that at first. And then sort of, the weeks and months of, getting out of bed late, in time for work, but much later than usual. And you see, it's very easy to fall into bad habits of getting out of bed late, staying up late because you can sleep in a bit longer. Perhaps not getting properly dressed for work and getting yourself in that mental state for work, like a lot of people do when they're perhaps getting dressed in a suit or business attire or on their commute, and then just not seeing people all day, every day, for whole weeks at a time, months at a time sometimes. And that was something that I definitely struggled with. Certainly a couple of years ago that hit its peak. And then I sought some support and figured out ways to get around that, and certainly prioritize social life and seeing people outside, both outside of work, but also in work when possible, as much as possible, having video calls, making extra efforts to go and speak to people either on the phone or just for general catch-ups, just like coffee chats, rather than it has to be about a meeting. So that was a really big challenge, and that's probably my big three would be, definitely lean on family and friends and support and try and see them as often as possible, if you're a home worker, and then also try and see your colleagues as often as possible too, even if it's in a virtual setting, because even just talking to somebody over the phone, you feel a lot closer than if you're just spending days or weeks at a time just through email, just through instant messenger. And then when I say others too, so I've been through that journey, and certainly recognize that working from home is not plain sailing. It has as many issues that you have to struggle with compared against the benefits you may have of not having to commute and saving on petrol or train fare. And then when COVID hit, all of my colleagues then were sort of forced into that same challenge, and even worse than that, they weren't able to necessarily see their family and their friends as often as they would have liked. It was an extreme version of what I'd previously experienced. So for me, a lot of the time I spent was ringing round, messaging round, emailing round different teams and people that I knew, across, like, I'm talking like hundreds of people here, to try and make sure they were all okay and coping, because I was very able to recognize, we'd have, say, big conference calls, and certain people who would, would often be quite lively in meetings, were being, put my camera on today, I'm not really feeling quite up to it. All those like little red flags that I'd experienced in myself, I was then, trying to identify in others, and to sort of do that well-being aspect, because, everyone struggled over the last year. And I was in a fortunate position that I could sort of help and really, reach out to people with, I don't know, just with like a helping hand, not necessarily telling people how to be better, because everyone's, ways that they're going to be fixing those problems or finding ways to get through it are going to be different. But just generally recognizing that people needed that face-to-face contact or whatever contact, and they didn't have it.
Yeah, definitely, because we're in a similar position to you, because we work from home I've been working from home for 2 years now. So I was used to that when lockdown happened, but then you had all the other differences as well, where you weren't able to go out as much, apart from your daily exercise, you weren't able to see your friends, etc. So that is something that was really difficult. And working in a small business, you're kind of limited to the amount of people that you were speaking to anyway. So I think your colleagues sound like they were lucky to have you to kind of draw on your own experiences and to help them along the way. Rather, because I think that's what they needed as well at some points, is just to have a general conversation, because like you said, not being in an office environment, you kind of miss out on those conversations that you might have when you're making a cup of tea, or just when you walk into the office saying hello, how was your evening, talking about TV programs, things like that. I think they're the bits that we kind of take for granted. And when you start losing those, your life literally just turns into doing work, or having an evening which is based around like Netflix or Amazon or whatever, you know what I mean? But that lacks real social interaction. And that can be really mentally draining after a certain amount of time. But like you said, people might not even realize that is happening, and they might not understand those red flags that they're seeing as well.
Yeah, then you've touched on, like, the other big red flag that I didn't mention is people who aren't able to turn off, and they, because they're working from home at a desk they might sit at normally anyway, then they can just go beyond 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock. I mean, I had an email just a couple months ago that someone had sent through at 20 to 1 in the morning, and I'm like, what are you doing? You're going to burn out if you carry on working like that. So yeah, just telling people, look, go have a weekend, go have a night, just turn off the computer, please.
Yes, yeah. I found moving around my house was more helpful as well, like changing rooms and kind of changing scenery. And I'm lucky enough to have a garden, so when it is nice weather, to sit outside. But I know obviously there's a lot of people that weren't that lucky to have that, and they might be stuck in apartments, flats, whatever. And that's something that people really did struggle with as well. For those out there who'd like to get into project management, how would they go about doing this?
So as I kind of alluded to earlier, project management is a bit of a blessing and a curse in terms of, I don't know, if you're looking to get into it. It's a blessing because I think project management is one of the, in a way, it's one of the easiest fields to get into, because a lot of people accidentally get put into it anyway. And I'd say as well, it's probably one of the few fields where there's quite a clear route, like a career path. There's quite a clear career path from, I don't want to say low paid, but like there's like the entry point of being like a project support officer is very accessible, whether you have a degree or not. And a good PSO adds massive amounts of value to a project, so it's definitely a really worthwhile role. It's definitely a really worthwhile. I can't speak. It's definitely a really worthwhile role. There we go. That can do loads to make a project go really well. And then from there you can get the experience to be a project project manager, and then up to a program manager who, you know, might manage a suite of projects that all either are clustered together into one big program of work or are spread across a number of different projects. And then you've got routes into creating portfolio management offices, or just to sort of, you know, essentially being a project or program manager, but at bigger and bigger levels in terms of the amount of money that's at stake, the amount of people and resources. I mean, you know, the Commonwealth Games is happening next year. It's basically a project. So, you know, running the Commonwealth Games could be an attainable goal for someone who starts out as a project support officer. Although I guess the next one probably won't be for another 20 years in the UK. But, you know, events of that kind of scale are sort of the, you know, the top tier of project management. There are qualifications that are really important to get. At the same time, there's a number of different ones and different methodologies that exist. You know, you've got the government Prince 2. There is the Association of Project Managers. I think you had someone on the other week with Lean Six Sigma, which is, you know, one style of I think it's continuous improvement, but it's in that space of change delivery, and that's certainly a route that someone could go down if they start in projects. They could go more into continuous improvement, and then you've got things like agile methodology, and all these things. You know, you can either, if you get into a larger organization like I did, like such as a civil service or like a Deloitte or someone like that, then a lot of them will sponsor you and fund you to go and do these qualifications, and a lot of them have foundation qualifications too that sort of give you a sort of an entryway into it. Like the Prince 2 Foundation is just like a 3-day course, and you finish off with a 50-question multiple choice test, I think. But it's, you know, it's a recognized qualification that you can put onto your CV, and it will support you throughout your career journey. So yeah, the curse part is that because people accidentally get put into project management roles because they're good at their day job, whatever that may be, sometimes that speaks to organizations not properly valuing that project management role and not seeing it as its own distinct thing with its own distinct set of, you know, characteristics and methods and practices, which are all really important to do well and to do right if you want your project to, you know, to deliver the benefits you're looking for, to deliver that change really well. So yeah, I think in a way, a lot of people who accidentally find themselves as project managers, some of them swim and just really take to it, and that sort of takes them off on a whole different career journey. And I think for some people, they end up sinking and being a bit overwhelmed by it because they haven't been properly supported by an organization that doesn't properly recognize it as a distinct role. And then they're like, oh, I hate the word project. I don't ever want to be involved in one again. So it can get a bit of a bad reputation in some places as well. But I think if you've either experienced that or you know of other people who have, I'd very much be sort of not putting the blame, but I'd be thinking, okay, well, how did that organization not support that person in that project management space? Because there are so many things out there to support project managers. And also, I guess, wondering why they put someone who doesn't want to be a project manager in that role in the first place.
Yeah, I think you need to properly interview for that, don't you? Not just going on what skills people have. And I think you said about the different qualifications. Like I did my Prince 2 a few years ago now. And one of the key bits that I picked up from doing that and then kind of working within the project environment is that understanding that while you're learning lots of different elements to the project, and there's lots of different aspects to it, that you don't need every single one necessarily for every single project. If the project's quite small, you're not going to go through the whole kind of theory behind Prince 2, because otherwise you'll probably spend more time doing that than you actually do on the project. So it's kind of like taking those key bits, and it's not just sitting down with your big textbook going, right, so I need to start here with my business plan, and then I need to do this, blah blah blah, etc. So that's one of the key learnings I had.
You're so right there, Katie, because in fact that's one of the ways that project management is a curse in the other direction, in the way that sometimes a company might decide, oh, you know what, we recognize project management and it is its own specialism and it's really important and we're going to invest in project management, and they come down with a massive text like the whole Prince 2 textbook or whatever, and they say, right, every single project will be run by every single page in this 300 word, you know, textbook, And we will follow every single process, and everything will be done like incredibly well because we are following the textbook. And that's where, you know, a good project manager can shine, because if they understand the textbook and they understand all the different sort of methods and practices, then they can, as you say, they can pick and choose. They can cut, because you should customize every single project. You should customize all the methods that you're using and the different rituals or governance structure or whatever to suit that project, and then you cut away all the rest of the fat. It's kind of like, you know, a project management textbook is like a piano in the sense that it has all of the notes, but if you want to play, you know, a really great piece, you don't need all the notes. You just need the ones that sound good together, and it's the exact same with a project.
That kind of resonates with learning as well, because I've seen it so many times where people leave one organization and then they'll go into another organization and they'll literally like lift and shift their training throughout each organization, so they're not making that personalization to that. So as much as the theory behind it might be similar or the same, you need to have that personalization for that particular organization, because it might not work because your audience might be slightly different. They've got a different culture there, they've got a different type of system that they're using for learning, they might deliver learning differently. There's so many different things that could impact that you can't just then take that piece of learning that you've done once about 20 years ago. Things change as well.
In one of my first admin jobs, I created this absolutely fantastic filing system with like paper folders and the big filing drawers. I can't use that now. We don't have the paper.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Things have changed. You can transfer it online and use your filing system on your computer, but yes, exactly. So I can see from your LinkedIn you run a community of professionals. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. And the two big things that I was seeking to try and find an answer for, or to sort of like help solve both for myself and for other people, is one, that work from home like community. So as someone who works from home, I would absolutely love I loved being in the office, and certainly going into the office when I used to, it was fantastic because you get to talk to people and see people all the time, which is, you know, brilliant as someone who's hidden away at home quite often. So one of the reasons for that community, one of the reasons I set that community up is so that people can have that like more personalized contact, so that they can, you know, talk to each other online whilst they're working from home. But also it's very much that, you know, I remember you go into the office and you get there on Monday, it's like, oh, how's your weekend been? You talk about, you know, if you'd watched Love Island or something else, or some good place, you've gone for a meal. If someone had just come back from holiday, you'd hear their stories. And it's a lot harder to do that now in work when we're all virtual or working from home, or the majority of us are, because all the meetings that you go to usually are, there's a reason for them. You know, it's a team meeting, or it's about a deliverable, or it's an update on something. And sometimes, yeah, I see people trying to like sort of shoehorn the first 2-3 minutes into that, like trying to give all that sort of office conversation, but it's hardly anything. So one things that we're doing in that community is we're having those conversations throughout the day, and it can involve little complaints about work sometimes. You know, if you receive like a angsty email from someone, you can just sort of go to the community and be like, oh, I've just had this email from this person, and you can sort of vent a little without having the potential for the professional backlash you might have if you tried to do that in the actual office. So that's one thing there. So it's reaching out to people who work from home. It's giving them like a bit of a community that they can talk to, and it can hopefully make them feel less like they're just sat at home alone. And then the other is sort of the project management professionalism. You mentioned about you've seen people sort of take a whole like learning suite of documents and just shift it to the next organization. In a way, partly what we're doing, because most of my network is project managers or people involved in change, and what we're doing in that community is we are creating sort of different training tools for different aspects of project management, with a massive focus on like understanding the theory and then understanding how and when to apply it in practice. So it's about giving people a set of tools that they can take with them, but then when they apply it, they customize it to the organization, rather than, oh, I'm just going to give you this textbook that's my textbook, rather than the Prince 2 textbook. So yeah, I mean, we're right at the start of doing that. And I've got a couple of really, really good people from across different change management communities and my network involved in that. So I'm really excited with where we can take that. But, you know, we could always do with more people who are interested in that kind of thing, giving us their feedback, being involved with putting things together. So yeah, certainly if anyone's interested in that, just give me a message on LinkedIn or something.
Oh, that's awesome. It sounds like a good place to kind of collaborate, especially for those that like interested in the project management field, but also those kind of working from home. Thank you for joining me today, Chris. If people want to connect with you or find out more about you and project management, how would they get in touch?
So I mean, if you put Chris Plans It, all one word, into Google, odds are I'll come up in one form or the other. So if you put Chris Plans It into Google, you're likely to find me on LinkedIn. You're also likely to find me on Twitter too, and you may even find me on YouTube and Instagram as well. But Instagram is basically just pictures of different teas and coffees that I've bought. So if you're interested in that, feel free to go there. But yeah, I can be contacted on well, mainly LinkedIn and Twitter is probably the best place to go.
Awesome, thank you. We'll add the links to the show notes as well, so people have got those there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much again.
Katie, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. You can register to join the Learning Effect community. The link to do so is in the show notes below. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the Learning Effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.